Let's get to the lesson. You believe in the providence of God? You really believe in the providence of God? Suppose I told you that the word providence is only found one time in the Bible. You got the New King James Bible, it's not even in there at all. These modern translations don't even have the word providence in it. But if we ask any Christian, oh yeah, I believe in the providence of God. Now the one time it's found in the King James, it's not even talking about God's providence, it's talking about the providence of the King. And yet we believe in the providence of God. And our task in this lesson is to help each of us to have a better understanding of the providence of God. And we'll leave here hopefully with a better understanding and greater comfort and peace of mind and faith about what's happening in our life or what may happen in our lives because of the providence of God. You know, we talk a lot about the cessation of miracles, and even those who talk about modern day miracles admit they cannot do Bible miracles. You ever think about that? In Bible times, they restored the ear off of a man that the ear had been severed. Those who sort of claim miracles today, a good question that I sometimes ask is, have you ever seen a Bible miracle? And they say, what do you mean by that? I said, ever seen anybody raised from the dead? And they say, oh no. And all of a sudden you get over to the fact that even they sometimes question whether the kinds of miracles that they're claiming in some of the religious movements in America, whether those miracles even exist. Now, it's not our purpose to talk about the cessation of miracles, but when we've preached about the cessation of miracles, sometimes we walk away thinking, well, God just doesn't work anymore. Have you ever thought about how few miracles there are in the Bible? At one time, my understanding of the Bible was you open up Genesis 1 and there are the miracles of creation. And when you get to the end of the book of Revelation, on every page of the Bible, there are miracles. That's not the case. There are only 5 times in the history of the Bible and the history of mankind on this earth that there's been a lot of miracles. There's obviously a lot of miracles at the creation, right? You think about that when God spoke the world into existence. I heard someone say, and his chronology is not right, but he said it in a way that just captivated my attention. I'm sure the attention of all the young people there. He said, wouldn't you like to have been a little bunny rabbit in the Garden of Eden when God threw all the stars out in space? He's got the creation days wrong, but that's what miracles are all about. God just throws stars out there. When we understand the nature of the galaxy, what a sight that had to have been. And yet we talk about the miracles, and there were a lot of miracles there. There are a few times when there are miracles elsewhere, but the next major time there are miracles are when you get down to the land of Egypt. You think about the plagues that are there down in the land of Egypt. You think about the crossing of the Red Sea. You think about the manna. You think about the quail that God fed them with. You think about the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud. And you think about the voice of God from Mount Sinai. There were lots of miracles. When they're crossing the Promised Land, the very day they crossed over Jordan, after Moses had died, the very day they crossed over Jordan, the manna ceased. Now, God helped them capture all of those lands, and there's that one incident where He gave them Jericho. The rest of that, God helped them capture that land. You see, God doesn't have to work miracles to work. And so when we've talked about the cessation of miracles, we're not talking about the fact that God does not work. And so you look at the times when there are miracles in the Bible, and you've got about the creation. We got the time of the giving of the law. And then all of a sudden, there are some miracles. David killing Goliath is the providence of God. But that's not a miracle. It'd been a miracle if the rock had gone that way and done 180 degrees and come back. And you understand what a miracle is? It's when God sets aside natural law and does it. I'm not saying God didn't help David kill Goliath. God doesn't have to use miracles. If you and I were in charge of the world, we'd get this world so messed up we'd have to do miracles every day just to try to straighten it out, the big mess that we've made, and that's the reality. But all of a sudden, and then you get to Elijah and Elisha. 7 miracles of Elijah, 14 miracles of Elisha, 21 miracles right there in 15 chapters of the Bible. And then all of a sudden, it sort of stops. John the Baptist did no miracles. Jesus comes along. He's the 4th time there are miracles in the Bible, and the 5th time is after Jesus ascended into heaven, and that is whenever the apostles were performing miracles and the church was being established. I'm not saying that there are not some scattered miracles at other times. The time of Daniel being over in Babylon and the fiery furnace, it fits in that same kind of category. Well, you understand, there have to be a miracle to create the world, to make something out of nothing. In and of itself, by definition, is a miracle. Why all those miracles at Mount Sinai? Moses could have gone up those mountains and walked out of the mountains with the 10 Commandments, and there not been a single miracle. When it got down to the ground, nobody would have known that message was from God. Do you know why the miracles are in Egypt? It's to confirm the messenger. And if you begin looking at the very nature of miracles, that's what you'll come to a realization of. It's a confirmation of the miracles. There is that time of Elijah and Elisha. Why? Because all of a sudden you're going to have those last 17 books of the Bible, half of the Old Testament nearly, and they are authenticated by the miracles of the prophets Elijah and Elisha. Give credibility to all of the other prophets that follow after them. Elijah and Elisha were prophets, and they gave credibility by their miracles to all those others that follow. You deal with Daniel over in Babylon, you've got a similar situation when in a foreign land there was a king who did not believe in God, and it was absolutely necessary for the message of Daniel to be confirmed by the interpretation of dreams and the fiery furnace and Daniel in the lion's den. And obviously when you get to the New Testament, what's it all about? It's the confirmation of the New Testament. He gave them water in the wilderness. Where'd that water come from you had this morning when you got up? It didn't come out of a rock. The source of it? The very same source of the water that came out of the rock, and that is God Almighty. Isn't that amazing? The water that you drank is no more or less from God than the water that came out of the rock when Moses struck the water. What about the manna? What about the biscuits you had this morning? I'm sure your wife got up and cooked you breakfast with biscuits, did you? I mean, she's so great. She can whop that biscuit can on the side of the cabinet, and those miracles that popped out of that can are as much from God as the man in the wilderness. God doesn't always use miracles. He doesn't have to. And you stop and you think about all that's involved in that. God does not have to use miracles to work and do His work. But I want to tell you this. There's providence in the Bible. What do we mean by providence? What's that word mean? Well, it's 2 parts. There's the word pro and the word vidence. Pro meaning before, like a prototype, something before. And the vidence part of it is the word we get video from. You know what providence is? It is God seeing before it happened. Abraham walking up the mountain. You know the story about Isaac. I don't have to tell you that story, all the details. Isaac says, here's the wood, here's the fire, where's the sacrifice? And you know what Abraham said? God will provide. That's not the word providence, but it's the concept of providence. And when Abraham got up to the mountaintop, God had seen beforehand If you and I had been in charge of that, we'd have had to zap that ram in that thicket over there. We'd have had to create the ram. Oh, I almost forgot that. God already had that lamb somewhere on this earth wandering around, and that lamb was there. God provided it. God's providence. God sees ahead of time. Moses coming off at the burning bush, he said, I cannot speak. You think that caught God off guard? You think God didn't see that ahead of time? You know what God told Moses? When you walk off this mountain, your brother's going to be down at the foot of the mountain. His brothers, at least 10 days away, maybe longer than that, before there ever was the burning bush. And so here's Aaron leaving the land of Egypt and coming, 10 to 20 days before Moses ever even knew he had a problem. What about your problem? Just spring up on it? Yeah, probably. Probably just surprised you as much as the burning bush surprised Moses out there in the wilderness. God saw that coming. That's providence. God sees beforehand. Ethiopian eunuch. Philip's got to get down from Samaria all the way down to the road that leads to Gaza over in that area. One man's in a chariot. He's got about 40 miles to travel. Philip, he's got 60 plus miles to travel. He's not in a chariot. Philip had to leave several days before the Ethiopian ever had that problem, reading Isaiah chapter 53. God saw the problem. And if a man's got a problem, it's the nature of God. If a man's looking for me, you'll find me when you search for me with all of your heart. God already had the answer. He'd left several days before to get on the road. God could be doing that with the very problems you're facing right now. God sees it beforehand. Let's take just a few minutes and talk about the fact God does provide. Does God provide for evil men? Can you think of any verse, any place in the Bible that you learn about God providing for wicked men? Sermon on the Mount, right? He makes the sun and the rain. He makes the sun to rise and makes the sun to shine down from heaven on the good and on the evil. And He sends the rain on the just and on the unjust. Why? Because God knew that men on this earth needed to have food, and God provided it even for wicked men. That has to do with the nature of God. God loves His creation, and God provides for that. Wouldn't it be amazing if the Lord only provided for those who were His children? What if God, the only people who blessed on this earth was you? You got your neighbor and you move into that house, that you in several months ago, years ago, you moved into that house, and the very next day, overnight, beautiful green grass had grown up all around that house. And you didn't have anything to do with it, just popped up in there. And then lo and behold, you had that old car when you moved into that house. And whenever you moved into that house, you had that old car, and you woke up the next morning, had a brand new car sitting out front. And the neighbor says, what's happening? What's happening? You come into some... No, he said, I did become a member of the Church of Christ about a week or so ago. And the Lord said He's going to take care of me. Look, I got green grass and I got a car. And lo and behold, he woke up the next morning and he's got a boat. And then the next day he gets up and he's got a new tractor, and the day after that he's got an airplane sitting out there in the driveway, and the neighbor comes over and says, what's the name of that church? That's not the way it works, is it? That sun shines down equally on the crops of the wicked and the righteous. That's His nature. God provides for wicked men. I think it is interesting. We're not aware of this. Remember the 7 years of plenty down in the land of Egypt? Who got the benefit of the 7 years of plenty, and then the 7 years when there were no crops? Well, the evil Egyptians did, who didn't even believe in God. What on earth is that food down there for? Because there's Jacob and his boys up in, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the descendants as his chosen people up in the promised land. And he knew at least 9 years before they ever moved down into the land of Egypt, he knew there's going to be a famine. Already worked for it, had it all worked out. And that 7 years of plenty had far more to do with God providing for Jacob and his children than it did for providing for the Egyptians, though the Egyptians were blessed because of it. God provides, and He provides for the wicked. Does He provide for His creation? Does He provide for the creation? What about the birds? Did Jesus say anything at all about God providing for the birds? You remember the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6 of the book of Matthew? He says, take no thought for the morrow, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, or wherewithal shall you be clothed. And then He says, behold the fowls of the air. They sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your Father provides for them. Not the word providence. God provides for them. You ever had a pet bird? Did you forget to buy food? You understand what I'm talking about? Sometimes people have a parrot or a canary or something, and they can't even remember to feed one single bird. How many birds are there in the world? I tried to Google it, and I kept getting so many answers, I couldn't figure out which one to believe. How does the number 400 billion sound to you for the number of birds? Yet they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns. And yet your Father feeds them. What's that all about? Are not two sparrows, Matthew chapter 10, verse 25, are not two sparrows sold for a farthing, the old King James says? And yet not one of them falls to the earth without your Father. Did you think about that? The problem is they don't know what a farthing is. I spent nearly 10 years as a missionary years ago in New Zealand. I finally found out what a farthing was. A farthing, well, let's start with the big penny they've got down there, a British coin. It's about the size of a silver dollar. It's called a penny. Half of a penny, they call it a halfpenny. Half of a penny, a little bit smaller, and a copper coin, worth half of a penny. You know what half of a halfpenny is? It's a farthing. You know what half of a farthing is? It's a mite. So if two sparrows are sold for a farthing, then one sparrow would be worth half a farthing, which is a mite. Remember the widow's mite? Jesus said, look at the birds. There are commands in the Bible that we look at and we're not even aware they are commands. I want you to hear what God says. Take time to look at the birds. I'll tell you something you've never seen. You've never seen a skinny bird. Just get back in your memory. You remember when you was a kid? You remember that little bird that fallen out of a nest and was down on the ground, didn't even have good feathers, might already barely had his eyes open. You remember finding one of those birds? Ever do that? You tried to find the nest and couldn't find the nest, and all you did, man, you picked up that little bird and you carried it home, and you said, Mama, we need to take care of this bird. And she said, go get a shoebox. You got a shoebox, and you tried to build some sort of nest out of whatever kind of tissue you could find or whatever it was. You tried to build a nest, and then all of a sudden you recognize this bird's got to eat. What little baby birds eat? World Book Encyclopedia. Aren't you glad you had those? You go find out about that mama bird chewing up that worm and then spitting it back down into the mouth of that little baby bird. And you said, Mama, we got some birds that's going to starve to death. And yet the very worm that bird ate was providence. Isn't that remarkable? Not one of them lights on the earth. The Greek word there is really interesting. This translated in the King James, not one of them falls to the earth without your Father. And so I'd read that, and I'd just see a bird, flopping along, and all of a sudden have a heart attack, and it just drops down to the earth. And that's about my vision of that verse. You've seen birds, have you not? Ever drive your car down the highway and you're doing 60 miles an hour, and all of a sudden that bird hits the windshield? You know how sudden? You know what? A bird just fell to the earth. What'd you think about? What hit me? And then you thought about that bird. You saw something fly back over. You may have looked in the rearview mirror to confirm what you saw. You forgot the bird, looked at the windshield. And that's about the story. That's about what happened. God saw that bird. One number, when I did the Google search, 800 billion birds. Half of them die every year. 800 billion birds, and yet not one falls to the earth without your Father. Command from God. Christians, look at the birds. You want to believe God provides? The Greek word there that's translated in the King James as falls to the earth can mean to alight, to land. Not that he's flying along, has a heart attack, falls out of the sky. Oh, not that at all. It's flying along and it lands on the earth, and the Lord knows exactly where that bird landed. Do you know what it also allows? Not one bird flies from the branch of one tree to another bird without your Father. Look at the birds. And something that you'll never see, you've never seen a skinny bird. Now hear the words of Jesus. Are you not worth more than a bird? I don't have time to look in great detail at this psalm. I'm not going to tell you where it is yet, because you'll be turning on there and you'll be reading ahead. Let me show the rest of God's creation. God sends the springs into the valleys. They flow among the hills. They give drink to every beast of the field. The wild donkeys quench their thirst by them. You guys live in a fortunate part of the country where you got these mountain streams. Sometimes when you're out hiking, there's that little stream. I wonder why that's here. Because there are beasts that live in that forest that needs water, and God provides for the beast. Beside them, beside the streams, the birds of the heaven have their homes. They sing among the branches. God waters the hills from his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied with the fruit of his work. He causes the grass to grow for the cattle. You've seen it, haven't you? Driving along, some of these windy little roads you have in some parts of this country, and all of a sudden on each side of the road, there are deer just all over the place. Guess what they're eating? The grass the Lord put there. God knew deer needed grass, and the Bible said He causes the grass to grow for the cattle and vegetation for the service of men. They bring forth fruit from the earth and wine that makes glad the heart of a man. All to make his face shine. The trees of the Lord are full of sap. The cedars of Lebanon, which He planted, where the birds make their nest. Wait a minute. You know, birds only make their nest certain levels and certain heights, and there are some birds that will not make their nest unless there are enough tall trees there. And the God of heaven said, I put those tall cedar trees there because I'm concerned about these birds. And says, where the birds make their nest, the stork has her home in the fir tree, the high hills are for the wild goats, and the cliffs are a refuge for the rock badgers. He appoints the moon for seasons. The sun goes down. He makes the darkness, and it is night, in which the beasts of the forest creep about. The young lions roar. David, what do you know about that? Well, he was a shepherd. Did he not talk about the Lord delivered to me from the paw of the bear and the mouth of the lion? He knew a lot about it. And David's out there, and he hears the roar of a lion. And he says, the young lions roar and seek their food from God. The cry of that lion is a supplication in this poetical language of this psalm, crying out to God, God, give me food this day. The sun rises, they gather together, they lie down in their den. Man goes out to his work, and he labors until the evening. Oh Lord, how manifold are your works. The earth is full of your possession. This great and wide sea, in which are innumerable teeming things, living things, small and great. There the ships go. There's the Leviathan, which you've made to play there. These all wait for you, that you may give them their food in their due season. How much life is there in the ocean? And the Holy Spirit says, and every fish that's in the sea is there waiting for God to feed them. They wait for you that you may give them their food in their due season. What you give them, they gather in. You open your hands, and they are filled with good. I've never seen a skinny fish. Have you? Are you not worth more than a fish? We talked about the creation this morning of the living creatures that He made, and then of that living soul that He made, the difference in those. You think God is more concerned about the birds and about the fish in the sea than He is about you? Oh, ye little faith. Solomon in all of his glory was not arrayed like one flower, one lily of the field. Behold, the lilies of the field. And yet Solomon in all of his glory was not clothed like one flower. I want you to know God will take care of you. If you doubt it, look at the birds. And hear the words of Jesus, and let them echo down to the very depths of your soul, to that eternal spirit that you are. Are you not worth more than a bird? I want to talk in one final segment about the special providence of God. We've talked in a generic way about God being concerned about evil men, His concern about the birds, His concern about all of these things. But do you recognize that because you are a child of God, the level of providence moves up another level? It's likely there are widows who are here right now. If not, you know the widows. When my dad died, I sat down and read every verse in the Bible I could about widows. And almost without a single exception, God never talks about widows without talking about He's going to take care of them. That tithe that was given to the Levites, guess who it went to? Went to the widows. Pure and undefiled religion is what? To visit the fatherless and widows. And who was that son that was about to be buried, that was raised from the dead in the town of Nain by Jesus? The widow of Nain. God specializes over His children, and especially over widows and those who are homeless. What do we mean by special providence? 1 Peter chapter 3. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and His ears are open to their prayers. Brian, I'm going to pick on you. I'm going to call Brian by name. When I call Brian's name, you put your name in that verse. Brian, the eyes of the Lord are over you, and His ears are open to your prayers. You believe that? That's providence. Special providence. Group of mothers get together. Kids are playing in the other room, maybe outside if the window's open or something. And all of a sudden, there are 4 or 5 little kids in that other room outside playing, and one little child cries out. You know what happens? There's one mother that recognizes the cry of that one little child, and that one mother jumps up and rushes into the other room. My child is crying. What's wrong? I don't have a head big enough to grab a hold of a lot of things. Sometimes I have to almost think in kindergarten level to get it. And what I'm about to describe to you is not the way it really is. It's just the only way Dan can get a hold of it. Imagine what heaven must be like. Imagine all of the reports of all that's going on this earth, and it's all going up to God. There's this one, there's that one, and there's another one, and there's another one, and there's another one, and there's another one. And all of a sudden, Brian, with your broken heart, you cry out to God. Put your name there. Brian, in your broken heart, you cry out to God, and God says, "Stop! My son Brian is crying." And He runs to hear your cry. That's special providence. The eyes of the Lord are over the righteous. He sees what you're unable to see. He sees every bit of the future. He sees it beforehand, and God will provide with every temptation. He knows what temptation is coming, and before it ever gets there, He's planned a way of escape for you. And if you'll take just a moment, especially if you're older, but young people, you can, in a more limited way, do what these who are older can do right now. Look back into your life when there was a period of hopelessness. My mate died, and I cannot make it. My child is dying. I don't know if I can handle it. And God provided strength from other people, or strength from the faith that was within you, and walked you not into the valley of the shadow of death, but all the way through the valley of the shadow of death, because He saw it coming. What's your problem? Don't worry about anything. King James, be anxious for nothing, But in everything, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known unto God. And in Dan's kindergarten brain, when you do it, God says, stop. Dan's calling out to me. And He who cares for every bird has special eyes over us. You've had those eyes. When I was a father, I had the father's eye in this story. I now have the grandfather's eye. In fact, I'm old enough and have the great-grandfather's eye. I just don't want to admit I'm in that great-grandfather age yet. You ever had that little kindergarten graduation? Little performance, piano performance, little play acting on and all the children are lined up right along. They're going to walk across the stage there. And you look over there and there's your little girl. Little blonde-headed, blue-eyed. And there's dirt on her dress. She's almost in tears. You know what Granddad does? Honey, don't you worry about that. I'm going to buy you 3 new dresses tomorrow. That little stinking boy that's behind her starts pulling on her pigtails. If he does that one more time, I'm going to knock the snot out of that kid. That's providence. And you look around the room and you feel sorry for all the other grandparents are there because you got the prettiest one and she's in that little pretty dress, got a little bit of dirt on it. And so she got in the first grade. It's time for art class. And the teacher says to your little first grader, child, grandchild, tomorrow we're going to paint paintings. Now you need to bring one of your big brother or sister's shirts, put it on. Don't want to get your clothes messed up. Just tell your mama you need to, a bigger shirt to wear, a dirty shirt so you don't get paint on. But tomorrow we're going to have all of these easels here. It's going to have canvases on it. You're going to have your own little palette of plate. And I want you tonight, before you go to bed, I want you to plan the painting you're going to make. In 5 or 6 years of age, you go home. You're so excited. You've never been able to do a painting in your life, and it's going to happen tomorrow. And you know when you bring that painting home, Mama's going to take off all of the paint that's on the refrigerator, and the only thing to be left there is your painting. You got it all figured out. And you head to school the next day, and you know what happens? You know that little boy that pulled your hair in kindergarten? He's in the first grade now. He comes over and he takes your little daughter's palette of paint and just takes his brush and just throws paint all over that canvas. And your child's been brokenhearted said, I had it all planned out. It's not what I planned. That teacher comes and said, honey, let me have that brush. And those blotches of black and brown she makes and turns into beautiful mountains in the distance. And all of that big splattering of blue becomes a beautiful sky with white clouds and a beautiful lake. And that Technicolor stuff becomes like a rainbow in the sky and a flower garden that is so beautiful. And every color that is in there, the teacher uses it in some way to make it fit in that painting. And that's what's happened in your life. You're 10, 12, you got it all planned out. I want to tell you, life's going to come on and grab that paintbrush out of your hand. It's going to splatter it all over the canvas of your life, and you'll hardly know what to do. Now we know, I wish we did, Now we know, not now we wish, now wouldn't it be wonderful? Now we know that all things work together for good to those that love the Lord. And whatever comes in your life, this day, this week, this year, this lifetime, don't look at the canvas of your life and say, it's all over. Give God the paintbrush and trust in God. Because the eyes are over Brian. And folks, that's what providence is. God sees it ahead and already has the solution. If we could stand where God stands and know what God knows and see what God sees, we would not change one single thing that's happening in our lives, because we trust Him and He's got the paintbrush. And when in despair we throw up our hands because of our children and their behavior, or because of broken marriages or lost jobs or 1,000 other things, and we hold up our hand, throw up our hands in despair and say, what is the use? Abraham said it to Isaac, my God will provide. And that's providence. But if you're not a Christian, you don't have special providence. He'll bless you with physical blessings. He'll give you sunshine and rain, and because you live around those who are Christians, He'll bless you even sometimes through them, like through Joseph down in the land of Egypt to the Egyptian. But if you're not a Christian, you don't have providence. You need to be a Christian. And who knows but what in the providence of God, God knowing what this lesson would be and what you needed to hear, perhaps you're here for the very providence of God. If you're not a Christian, perhaps the very words of this lesson would lead you to decide to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. To change your life, that's repentance. I'm going to serve Him. And then having used your lips to confess Him as the Son of God, you can be washed in the blood of Jesus through baptism. And God will wipe away, never ever to be mentioned again, every mistake you've ever made. That's providence. If you're an unfaithful Christian, there may need to be changes you need to make, and maybe even as you sit where you are right now, you don't need to come down these aisles necessarily. You just need to resolve in my heart, I'm going to learn how to trust God more. I'm going to do what He told me to do. And that is look at the birds. Are you under the providence of God? Our God has almighty power. And there's power in His blood to wash away your sins and to help you walk through the valleys of your life. They're oftentimes dark. If you need to respond to the invitation, won't you do so right now by coming to the front as together we stand and sing. Will you come?